careful to manage hope. Alex, haggard but resolute, asked the question no one else dared. What if Sarah and Marco are still alive? Maybe they saw something, ran, and someone else got caught. Talbot wanted to say yes, but the postcards, the coded messages, the sense of being watched, they offered only riddles. "I can't promise anything, Alex," she said softly. But the search isn't over. A week later, another twist. A local crab fisherman, Stan Bixby, called in, claiming to have found something tangled in his pots near Bay 7. Talbot met him at the dock. Stan handed over a sealed plastic bag containing a wallet, waterlogged but intact. Inside was a faded driver's license. Marco Velez. Talbot's heart lurched. She checked the contents. Old receipts, a photo of Marco and Sarah, a cryptic handwritten note. "If I'm gone, don't trust the man in the red raincoat." M.V. Talbot pressed Stan for details. "Pulled it up about 30 yards from the cave. It could have been drifting for years. I almost missed it, but the chain snagged." The wallet was sent to the lab. The note was preserved, dried, photographed. It was the first concrete sign Marco had been alive, at least for a while, after the day he vanished. Talbot tracked down every man in town with a red raincoat. None matched the partial print from the Polaroid. She canvassed the marina, the bars, the bait shops. Some folks remembered seeing a man in red, lurking near the cliffs the night of the storm, but no one knew his name. The pieces refused to fit. But something was coming together. A pattern or a warning, just out of reach. On the night the first winter snow threatened the coast, Talbot sat in her car above Miller's Point, watching the lights of boats blink across the bay. She replayed the evidence in her mind. Bones in the cave, none belonging to Sarah or Marco. The red jacket, the shadow in the Polaroid, the old camera in Murrow's shack, the cryptic postcards, the wallet and the warning about the man in the red raincoat. She stepped out into the biting wind, listening to the hiss of the tide against the rocks. The sea whispered its own story, a history of the lost and the waiting, of secrets drowned beneath the surface. But the truth, she knew, was closer now. Somewhere in the cold, shifting water, the bay was giving up its dead, but not all of them. Not yet. December 2023. Location, Miller's Point, Puget Sound. 30 years slipped away in a moment. One storm brought Sarah Kim and Marco Velez to the world's attention. Another would break the silence and expose secrets buried deep beneath the tides. It was a December night, days before Christmas, when the wind came howling in off the Pacific, fiercer than anything the town had seen in years. Rain hammered roofs. The old pines groaned, snapping brittle branches into the bay. The power flickered out just before midnight, plunging Miller's Point into darkness. The next morning, locals gathered to survey the damage. Mudslides cut off the main road. Driftwood and trash choked the marina. But it was a group of amateur explorers, teens home for the holidays, armed with phones and flashlights, who made the discovery that would change everything. They were following a path washed open by the storm, tracing a slick, rocky cut along the base of the cliffs. One boy, Owen Harper, led the way. He nearly fell when the rocks gave out beneath his feet, sending him sprawling against a moss-slicked wall. His light caught on something unnatural, a jagged opening, newly exposed just above the high tide line. "Check this out," he called. The others crowded around, shining their lights into the mouth of a hidden cave. The opening was tight, half collapsed, stinking of seaweed and old decay. But inside, the cave widened. They found the first clue almost immediately, a battered backpack half buried in silt. On the side, faded letters spelled out K-I-M. Phones came out, snapping photos. One girl, Kenzie, unzipped the bag. Inside were waterlogged notebooks, a Polaroid camera, a rusty flashlight, and a bundle of letters wrapped in a deteriorating scarf. Owen's voice trembled. "We need to call someone." Word spread quickly. By noon, the site was crawling with police, reporters, and curious neighbors. Detective Nia Talbot, now gray-haired but sharp as ever, returned to Miller's Point, heart pounding with a mix of dread and desperate hope. The cave had changed since she'd last seen it, the entrance blown wider, the contents washed forward by the flood. Technicians swept through, collecting evidence. Talbot watched as they bagged everything: the backpack, the camera, the letters, even the crumbling scarf. One officer approached, face serious. "We found something else, Detective. You'll want to see this." Inside the cave, among the debris, they'd unearthed another set of bones. This skeleton was smaller, possibly a woman's, possibly decades old. Beside it, a Polaroid photograph sealed in a cracked plastic case. Talbot took it, hands shaking. The image inside was badly faded, but she could make out a woman's face, older but unmistakable. Sarah Kim. The scene at the station was tense. The town buzzed with rumors. They found her. She was alive all these years. There was someone else in that cave. Talbot sat in her office, studying the evidence spread across her desk. The backpack, marked with Sarah's name, contained a notebook wrapped in plastic. Inside, Sarah's handwriting covered every page, scrawled in increasingly erratic lines. Talbot paged through the entries, reading fragments. "The water's rising. I can hear them above. I'm not alone. Marco is gone. They took him. I have to hide. If anyone finds this, please tell my family I tried. There's another entrance. I hear someone moving at night, never answers, just watches." Talbot's breath caught on that last line. For years, she'd wondered if the stories about the man on the cliff were nothing more than local myth. But here, in Sarah's own hand, was confirmation. Someone else had been there. Maybe Murrow. Maybe someone unknown. She called in forensics. The bones in the cave would be tested, but Talbot knew the odds. If it was Sarah, the case would close. If not, the mystery would deepen. The Polaroid camera yielded more clues. Technicians carefully pried open the brittle film cartridges, developing what they could. One photo showed Sarah, older, haggard, holding up a hand-lettered sign, Bay 7, Dawn. Another was an accidental double exposure, Sarah's face and the interior of the cave, but behind her, the blurred outline of another figure. Tall, male, features impossible to make out. The letters were water-damaged but partially legible. Most were addressed to Sarah's mother and brother. "Don't trust the man in the red coat. If Marco comes back, tell him I waited. I hear boats, but I'm too weak to try." There was one addressed simply to Nia. Talbot unfolded it, heart thudding. "Detective Talbot, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't let them forget me. Don't let them forget Marco. The man who took us, he wears a mask, changes his voice. He isn't alone. Don't trust anyone who offers help out here. Please. I hope someone finds us. I hope my family forgives me for leaving." Talbot pressed her hand to her mouth. The case had haunted her entire career. Now, the truth was bleeding out. Messy, tragic, incomplete. Within a week, forensic reports came in. The remains in the cave were not a genetic match to Sarah Kim, but were a close match to another missing woman, gone from the area in 1998. The backpack and Polaroids, however, were undoubtedly Sarah's. There was more. The cave's walls were marked with hundreds of scratches, names, dates, desperate messages. Sarah K., 1993. Marco, gone, waited. Don't trust him. And, carved over and over, Bay 7. Among the cave debris, forensics found DNA not just from Sarah, but from at least 2 unidentified males. One was a partial match to Marco Velez. Another matched the unknown man in the red coat. From earlier reports, a man whose identity remained elusive. Talbot went home that night and stared at the photos and journal pages arrayed on her table. Sarah's voice echoed in her head. "I hope someone finds us." The next morning she called Alex Kim, now in his 40s, married, living 3 hours away. She told him what they'd found. There was no joy, only a muted relief, a bone-tired thankfulness that some answers had finally surfaced. "Thank you for not giving up," he said quietly. "For all of us." But Talbot didn't feel finished. The cave had offered clues, but not the whole story. Marco's fate remained unknown. The shadowy presence described by Sarah was still nameless, faceless, a threat that lingered in the corners of memory and community. That night, another storm rolled in, rain battering the window glass, wind shrieking down the chimney. Talbot sat at her kitchen table, listening to the water, and thought about all that had been lost. And all that, at last, was returning to the light. December 2023. Location: Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. For 3 decades, the phrase Bay 7 had haunted the files of Miller's Point. It appeared in frantic scribbles, in postcards and Polaroids, in desperate messages scratched into stone and driftwood. But until the storm revealed Sarah Kim's backpack and letters, no one had truly known what it meant. Detective Nia Talbot sat in the cold light of the evidence room, surrounded by stacks of old case files and new forensic reports. The buzz of voices and police radios from the hallway faded to a distant hum. In front of her, spread out like the pieces of a puzzle, were every Bay 7 reference collected over 30 years. The driftwood message from 1993 postcards mailed to Mira Kim and Eduardo Velez Polaroids with Bay 7, scrawled in the margins journal pages from Sarah's notebook. The phrase underlined and circled again and again. Talbot stared at the evidence, frustration knotting her stomach. She needed a code breaker, someone who knew Sarah, someone who understood her games and hidden meanings. She called Alex Kim. He arrived that afternoon, bundled against the wind, his face thinner, eyes sharper. He greeted Talbot with a hug that surprised them both. "Let's see what she left us," he said quietly. They sat at the long table, working through the stack of artifacts. Alex read aloud from one of Sarah's journal entries, written in frantic pencil. "If you find this, Bay 7 is the answer. Remember our game, Polaroids, timestamps, it's all in the order." Alex frowned, thinking. "When we were kids, Sarah and I used to hide notes for each other. The clue was always in the timestamp, hours, minutes, even the order of photos. She loved ciphers." Talbot nodded. "You think it's a code?" "Has to be. Let's look at the postcards and Polaroids together." They spread out the original postcards. Puget Sound sunsets, the marina at dawn, the outcrop in rain and fog. Each had a message on the back, and each was time-stamped, sometimes down to the minute. Alex sorted them in chronological order by postmark, then cross-referenced the Polaroid timestamps found in the camera Sarah left behind. "There's a pattern," he said. "Look, the first postcard is postmarked 7:07 a.m. The first Polaroid is stamped 7:07 a.m. too. Every time the numbers match, the message is a warning." Talbot scanned the notes. "Remember Bay 7, watch the tides. Look where the water meets the rock, it's not over. 3x3x3. If you love me, listen." Alex wrote the times out, then pulled out Sarah's notebook for the matching entries. "See this?" He pointed to a journal page, dated July 1994. "If the light is on at Bay 7, don't stop. If it's off, go. He only comes when the light is on." Talbot's eyes narrowed. "What light?" Alex shrugged. "The only lights out there at night are the marker buoys. Bay 7 is the rusted one. Nobody ever repairs it, but sometimes it flashes, like someone's replaced the battery." Talbot felt the weight of possibility. Sarah was sending messages from captivity. Someone was signaling. Maybe for her, maybe for someone else. Alex flipped through the journal again, searching for more. Here, she wrote about hearing footsteps at night, seeing lights outside the cave. Sometimes she thought it was Marco, sometimes someone else. She was terrified to go out unless the buoy was dark. Talbot scanned the evidence log for maintenance on the buoys. In the last 3 decades, Bay 7's light had been officially out more than a dozen times, but local fishermen often reported seeing it flicker to life in storms, or when the fog rolled in thick. She called the harbor master. Is there any way someone could turn that light on or off remotely? He hesitated. Not officially. But if someone knew the wiring, or used a handheld spotlight, easy, nobody would notice, especially during storms. Alex pieced together a timeline, overlaying the postcards' timestamps, the Polaroid photos, and known reports of the light being visible from shore. It's a pattern, he said. Sarah sent her first message when the light was off. After that, every time she warned us, the light was on. Maybe she thought help was coming, or maybe she was warning us to stay away. Talbot's mind raced. If the light at Bay 7 was a signal, on meant danger, off meant safety. Someone out there had used it for years, as a lure or a warning. She pulled the last postcard, the one mailed to Bay 7. Wait for dawn. The truth is in the light. She stared at Alex. She wanted us to see something at dawn. That night, Talbot drove to Miller's Point, Alex riding shotgun, both silent with anticipation. Rain lashed the windshield as they reached the end of the road, the headlights sweeping over wet gravel and black water. The sky was clearing, dawn a few hours off. They waited, windows fogged, watching the marker buoys blink in the dark. Hours dragged by, cold seeping into their bones. Then, just before sunrise, a thin yellow glow sparked to life on Bay 7. The buoy's light, dead for weeks, burned steady for 5 minutes, then blinked out. Talbot turned to Alex. Someone's out there, right now. She radioed for backup, officers moving to the docks and along the cliffs. They swept the area with spotlights, scanning for boats, footprints, anything. But the bay was empty, the marker light now dark. Dawn broke over the water, gilding the bay in cold gold. Talbot stared at the horizon, heart hammering. Alex exhaled. She was right. The answer is in the timing. As they drove back, Talbot mulled over the coded messages, the warnings about the light, the untraceable figure in the Polaroids, the whispered references to the man in the red coat. Each clue had been left for them like breadcrumbs, but the path still bent away from certainty. At the station, Talbot assembled her team. We need surveillance on Bay 7, cameras, infrared, whatever we have. And I want every unsolved missing persons case along this stretch of coast re-examined for mentions of lights or signals. She sent divers to check the buoy for tampering. They found new wiring, a waterproof switch, and, hidden in the base, an old tin with a waterlogged cassette tape inside. The tape was rushed to the lab. Audio techs recovered fragments. Sarah's voice, muffled, whispering, "If you find this, I'm still here. Bay 7 dawn. Don't trust the man who comes when the light is on. He isn't who he says he is. Marco, if you hear me, run." Talbot listened again and again, shivers crawling up her arms. The voice was raw, desperate, alive. That night, Talbot wrote in her own notebook. Sarah was trying to save us, not just herself. The code wasn't a plea. It was a warning. And the man who watched the bay is still out there, waiting for the right light. The investigation shifted. The focus now on the watcher, the lures, and what, if anything, could still be alive in the silence between tides. January 2024. Location, Miller's Point, and Kitsap County Sheriff's Department Detective Talbot had always believed that every case, no matter how cold, could be cracked with persistence and luck. But now, 3 decades into Miller's Point's tangled mystery, she felt the grip of something older, a story that didn't want to be solved. The station buzzed with new urgency. Patrols swept the bay nightly. Divers combed the waterline near Bay 7. The surveillance team logged hours of foggy footage. Boats, otters, the bobbing shadows of buoys. Sometimes, just after midnight, the Bay 7 marker light would flicker to life, then go dark again, always just out of sync with the tide. The old tin cassette tape from the buoy haunted Talbot. She'd listened to the scratchy recording a dozen times, Sarah's whispered warnings, the edge of panic in her voice. The plea to Marco, "Run," echoed in her mind as she sorted through old files. What disturbed Talbot most were the matching patterns. Other cases, years apart, contained fragments almost identical to Sarah's story. 1979. A missing hiker left a journal mentioning a man in red who walked the rocks at dawn, waving a flashlight. 1985. A local fisherman vanished after reporting odd lights near Bay 7. 1998. The last known message from a missing woman was a note. "Don't follow the light at the buoy. Wait for sunrise." Each time the same cold presence, the watcher, the man in the red coat. Never seen for more than a flash, never caught by police. Talbot spread the files on her office wall, mapping every sighting, every coded warning, every vanished soul. The pattern spiraled out from Miller's Point, the epicenter of secrets. The new year brought fresh leads. A tourist snapped a photo of the cliffs at sunrise. Nothing unusual, until a technician enhanced the shadows. There, among the brambles above the bay, stood a tall figure in a red jacket, half-turned, face obscured by the hood. 2 days later, a fisherman reported seeing a small boat slip away from the buoy just before dawn. On board, a lone man in red. Talbot showed the photo to Alex Kim. He stared at it for a long time. "That's not Murrow," he said. "Murrow's dead. I read about it online. He passed away last winter." "Then who is this?" Talbot asked. Alex's face darkened. "It's someone new, or maybe the same man, just never aging." Talbot didn't believe in ghosts, but the evidence was mounting for something more than coincidence. She called in a forensic artist who created composites from witness memories, old photos, and the enhanced image. The result was chilling. An ageless, narrow face, high cheekbones, a blank, almost mask-like expression beneath the red hood. Several old-timers at the marina claimed to recognize him. "He's always been here," one said. "Since I was a kid, he'd walk the docks after storms." Never spoke. A background check on men fitting the description in the region came up empty. No records, no driver's license, no property deeds. The man was a ghost, alive only in rumor and glimpses. Talbot changed tactics. Instead of chasing the watcher, she studied his patterns, how he moved, where he was seen, when the light at Bay 7 was used. Alex helped her piece together a timeline. "Look, he only shows up during storms or at dawn, and the light is always a warning, never a beacon. I think he's chasing people away, not luring them in." Talbot stared at the wall of evidence. But if he's warning people, why do they disappear? Why leave messages saying not to trust him? Alex shrugged. "Maybe he isn't alone." Sarah wrote, "He isn't who he says he is. Maybe there's more than one watcher." The theory made Talbot's skin crawl. Multiple predators. One who lured, one who warned, or both sides of the same mask. The bay's secrets ran deeper than bones and driftwood. That evening, Talbot returned to Miller's Point with Alex. They climbed the cliffs as twilight faded, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The bay glimmered with the last light of day, the marker buoys bobbing in the dusk. They waited in silence, shivering as the wind picked up. The town behind them was hushed, its streetlights flickering on one by one. Far off, an engine coughed, then faded. Then, at precisely 5:14 a.m., the same time stamped on Sarah's last Polaroid, The Bay 7 buoy flared to life, yellow against the black water. A faint beam swept the cliffs. Talbot squinted, heart pounding. On the ridge, a shadow shifted. Someone stood among the trees, a tall, thin silhouette in red. Alex whispered, "That's him." Talbot's radio crackled. Patrol units closed in from both sides. They advanced carefully, shining their flashlights, calling out warnings. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. When the officers reached the spot, they found only an empty coat hanging from a low branch, red, rain-soaked, pockets empty. No sign of the man himself, but inside one pocket, tucked in a plastic bag, was a Polaroid. Sarah's handwriting on the back. "Don't wait for the light. Find the door." Talbot stared at the note, mind racing. Find the door. Not a buoy, not a cave, a door. An entrance hidden in plain sight. Alex gripped her arm. The cave had a second entrance. Sarah wrote about it, but nobody ever found it. Talbot radioed the search team. "Fan out. Check every old shack, every collapsed boathouse, every hidden cut along the bay. We're looking for a door, hidden, covered, something that doesn't belong." The team spread out as dawn broke, scouring the cliffs and forest. After 2 hours, a rookie deputy called in. "I think I've got something." Talbot and Alex rushed to the spot, a patch of blackberry brambles along a washed-out gully above the cave site. The deputy pointed to a slab of concrete half buried in mud, barely visible beneath the thorns. They dug carefully, uncovering a rusted iron hatch, its handle slick with moss. Alex's voice shook. "This has to be it." Talbot called for backup. The hatch groaned open, revealing a cramped, stone-lined passage that sloped downward toward the water. The air was damp, sour with decay and secrets. She led the way, flashlight trembling. The tunnel twisted beneath the cliffs, walls carved with dozens of names, hundreds of scratches, Sarah's included. At the end, the passage widened into a chamber littered with debris. Old clothes, scraps of rope, an empty Polaroid cartridge. On the far wall, a faded red coat hung on a hook. Below it, a line of Polaroids. Sarah, Marco, others Talbot didn't recognize. Lost souls from 3 decades of disappearances. Alex whispered, "It's a shrine." Talbot's heart hammered as she photographed everything. There were more clues here, more warnings, scraps of letters, more code to break. But for the first time, she felt the bay's silence had shifted. The Watcher's lair was empty, abandoned, but not erased. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the bay in light. Officers fanned the area, but found no trace of the Watcher. Talbot stepped into the morning, the cold air sharp with salt. She turned to Alex, voice steady at last. "We're closer. We know how he moved, how he watched. We know where he hid. We just don't know who he is, or if he's truly gone." Alex nodded, tears in his eyes. "But Sarah's voice led us here. She's still saving people, even now." As the tide rolled in, washing footprints from the shore, Talbot realized this was only the beginning. The Watcher had vanished, but his shadow stretched farther than the cliffs, and the truth would not rest until every missing soul had a name. January 2024. Location: the hidden tunnel, Miller's Point. Flashbulbs burst in the wet dark as forensic teams crowded the narrow stone-lined tunnel beneath the cliffs. Detective Nia Talbot pressed against the damp wall, notebook in hand, watching as evidence bags filled with Polaroids, scraps of fabric, and handwritten notes were cataloged one by one. The red coat from the hook was handled like a holy relic, zipped into a clear case, its pockets emptied with gloved care. Alex Kim stood at her side, silent, trembling with cold and memory. He traced the names carved into the stone. Sarah K., 1993, Marco Feuille, 1993, Allison M., 1985, Tommy R., 1979, and dozens more. Some faded into moss, some sharp as if cut yesterday. The chamber itself felt both claustrophobic and reverent, a sanctuary built for secrets. In the flicker of work lamps, Talbot saw evidence not just of one killer, but of an entire system. Rope, old lanterns, torn blankets, children's shoes lined neatly on a shelf. In the corner, beneath a rotten tarpaulin, they found more bones, at least 2 sets, based on the tiny skulls. Talbot's chest ached as she realized how many families had come here for answers that would never be whole. A forensic tech carefully pried Polaroids from the wall. Most were warped with time and damp, but a few survived. Sarah, bruised but defiant, holding a crude sign that read, "No light tonight." Marco, arms slung around her shoulders, both blinking into the glare. A pale little girl in a blue raincoat, date stamped 1986, name unknown. There were even recent ones, blurry and distorted. Teens, hikers, fishermen, faces frozen in moments of confusion or fear. Proof that the Watcher's work had continued well past Sarah and Marco. In the center of it all was a battered metal box, locked with an old combination dial. Talbot called for a toolkit, and within minutes, a detective had cracked it open. Inside, more letters, each addressed to a family by name, as if waiting for the day the truth would surface. She read aloud the topmost letter. "To whoever finds this..." We tried to leave a record. The Watcher is not alone. There's another, sometimes a woman, sometimes a man. They change clothes, voices. Sometimes they argue, sometimes they just watch. We tried to help those who came after. I hope it was enough. S.K. Talbot's voice wavered. Alex bowed his head, shoulders shaking. "She never stopped fighting," he whispered, "even in the dark." Above ground, the news traveled quickly. Within hours, the tunnel's discovery made national headlines. Secret shrine found in Bay cold case. Police link 3 decades of missing to Watcher lair. Families descended on Miller's Point. Some stood weeping at the edge of the search zone. Others waited for word in the firehouse, clutching photos and prayer beads. DNA samples were taken from every bone and object. The task would take months, maybe years. But finally, there was hope for answers. For Detective Talbot, it was the culmination and the beginning of a new kind of search. She worked late into the night with a forensic team, matching journal entries, Polaroids, and names, piecing together a macabre timeline of disappearances. She found connections between the Watcher's coded warnings and known storms, missing persons, and the flickering of Bay 7's light. What haunted her most, though, was the evidence of complicity. Multiple footprints, mismatched gloves, hair from different sources. The Watcher hadn't worked alone. Sometimes there had been 2. Sometimes even 3. Was it a family, a cult, or just the consequence of evil, recruiting what it needed, generation after generation? By week's end, a breakthrough. A latent print from the metal box matched a man who had died in prison in 2010. An itinerant drifter once questioned about the 1985 disappearance, but never charged. Another print, much fresher, matched an unsolved break-in at the marina the year before. Talbot gathered her team. This isn't over. The Watcher's lair was a hub, not an endpoint. Someone's still out there, maybe even using the site as recently as last year. Alex, now raw-eyed but resolute, asked, "What about Sarah and Marco?" Talbot set a hand on his shoulder. "We have their handwriting. We have Sarah's last Polaroid. We know they were here. We just don't have the final answer yet." Alex nodded, swallowing. "Thank you for not forgetting her." That night, after the search teams cleared out, Talbot stood alone in the chamber. The damp, mineral air pressed close, as if the walls themselves wanted to speak. She looked over the names, the faces, the echoes of children's laughter that would never be heard again, and she promised to the empty space, to the bay beyond the stone, To every grieving family, we will name you. We will not let you disappear. A breeze from the water found its way into the tunnel, and somewhere, just outside the circle of her flashlight, a new set of footprints waited to be found. By week's end, a breakthrough. A latent print from the metal box matched a man who had died in prison in 2010, an itinerant drifter once questioned about the 1985 disappearance, but never charged. Another print, much fresher, matched an unsolved break-in at the marina the year before. Talbot gathered her team. This isn't over. The Watcher's lair was a hub, not an endpoint. Someone's still out there, maybe even using the site as recently as last year. Alex, now raw-eyed but resolute, asked, "What about Sarah and Marco?" Talbot set a hand on his shoulder. "We have their handwriting. We have Sarah's last Polaroid. We know they were here. We just don't have the final answer yet." Alex nodded, swallowing. "Thank you for not forgetting her." That night, after the search teams cleared out, Talbot stood alone in the chamber. The damp, mineral air pressed close, as if the walls themselves wanted to speak. She looked over the names, the faces, the echoes of children's laughter that would never be heard again. And she promised, to the empty space, to the bay beyond the stone, to every grieving family, we will name you. We will not let you disappear. A breeze from the water found its way into the tunnel, and somewhere, just outside the circle of her flashlight, a new set of footprints waited to be found. Late January 2024. Location: Kitsap County Sheriff's Department / Millers Point. The discovery of the Watcher's shrine sent shockwaves through Millers Point and far beyond. News vans clogged the narrow coastal road. Vigils sprang up at the cliffs, candles flickering in the night wind. Families from as far as Idaho and California arrived, clutching hope and photos and the terrible need for closure. At the Sheriff's Department, Detective Nia Talbot moved between press conferences, forensic briefings, and private rooms where she met with mothers, brothers, and grown children of the missing. Each conversation left its own weight, a fresh scar. She learned their names, their stories, the small details that kept the dead alive in memory. DNA results trickled in. The first match came for the child's bones found beneath the tarpaulin. Tommy R., gone since 1979. His family, now scattered across the country, finally had a place to grieve. Next, a skull with a faded pink hair ribbon. Allison M., vanished in 1985. 2 more Polaroids yielded names from the 1990s. One by one, the faceless became known. But Sarah Kim and Marco Velez remained elusive. Their handwriting, their belongings, even a partial DNA match to Sarah on old cigarette butts, all confirmed they'd been in the chamber. Yet neither full set of remains was found. For Talbot, the mystery circled ever tighter. Alex Kim became a constant presence. He sifted through the evidence, cross-referencing Sarah's journals with missing persons lists. "She was mapping it out for us," he said. "She left codes for every child, every lost soul who passed through here." A breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A retired harbor worker, combing his attic after seeing the news, found a battered journal from 1994. He'd rescued it from the water near Bay 7 and kept it out of morbid curiosity. Inside, Talbot found the missing link. A set of coordinates, painstakingly penciled by Sarah. The next morning, Talbot, Alex, and a team of officers followed the GPS to a collapsed boathouse upriver, overgrown and nearly forgotten. There, hidden in the debris, they uncovered another entrance, this one sealed with rusted bolts and a battered plank. Inside, the air was thick and foul, but beyond the broken timbers, beneath layers of mud and rotting canvas, they found the final answers. 2 sets of remains, a man and a woman, arms still linked. Polaroid photos confirmed it. Sarah and Marco, lost but together to the end. Talbot wept as she stood in the ruined boathouse, the wind keening through the cracks. Alex crouched beside the bones, tears streaking his face, whispering, "You're found now. You can come home." The days that followed were a blur of sorrow and relief. The town came together for a candle-lit memorial, faces old and young, hands joined in a chain that stretched from the cliffs to the shore. For the first time in 30 years, the names of the lost echoed over the bay. Talbot spoke, her voice clear but trembling. "We cannot erase what was done here, but we can remember. We can give names to the lost, and we can promise this darkness will not return." After the ceremony, Alex pressed Sarah's last letter into Talbot's hands. "You kept your promise. You brought her home." Talbot didn't answer. She only nodded, letting the silence say what words never could. In her office, surrounded by files and Polaroids and a wall of names finally complete, Talbot wrote her last report. She listed every discovery, every match, every family notified. At the end, she added a line not for the file, but for herself. "Sarah's courage saved more than herself." Her voice carried across decades, lighting the way home for all the others. When she finished, she closed the file and turned off her desk lamp. Outside, the winter wind battered the windows. But somewhere out there, the bay was still and quiet, its ghosts at rest at last. February 2024. Location, Millers Point, Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. The bay thawed slowly as February turned, the endless gray broken at last by brief bands of winter sun. In the silence that followed the investigation, Millers Point began to heal in small, almost invisible ways. Fishermen repaired their battered boats. Children returned to the playground at the end of the cliffs, laughter chasing away the last chill. The Watcher's lair had been emptied, the bones claimed, the shrine sealed with concrete. Still, the water never gave everything back. Detective Nia Talbot drove the coast road one final time, her badge in the glove compartment, her official notebooks packed into a cardboard box. The investigation was over. Her work, 30 years of searching, was finished. The headlines faded, but the town was forever changed. Talbot stopped at the new memorial, a weathered stone set in the park above the cliffs, in memory of the lost. 1972 to 2024. Below, a list of names, no longer anonymous, no longer just numbers. There were flowers, Polaroids, and a child's toy car set carefully on the stone. Alex Kim stood beside her, hands jammed in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. He'd come alone. His parents, worn by years of grief and waiting, had returned to California. They watched the ceremony by video call, voices breaking as Sarah's name was spoken aloud at last. Talbot let the silence fill the space between them. "She would have liked this," Alex said quietly. "She always wanted to be remembered, not pitied, not forgotten." "She saved more than herself," Talbot replied. "She saved others. She saved this place." Together they stood as the sun burned through the mist, lighting the stone and the water below. The crowd thinned, people drifting back to their cars, their lives, the routines interrupted by tragedy. Weeks passed. DNA identifications continued, bringing new closure and sometimes new pain to families who had long since given up hope. The police department fielded calls from all over the country. Old cold cases were re-examined. Not every answer could be found, but the act of looking mattered. It was proof, finally, that someone cared enough to keep searching. One rainy evening, Talbot visited the empty station. She found herself standing by the evidence room, looking through the glass at the last box of belongings. Sarah's journal, Marco's wallet, a faded Polaroid camera. She pressed her palm to the glass. "You're home," she whispered. "You're not lost anymore." Life returned in fits and starts. At the marina, crab pots clattered and boat engines sputtered. A new generation of kids dared each other to sprint the length of the cliffs at dusk. Sometimes, at the edge of the water, Talbot caught the flash of a red coat in her peripheral vision, but always it was just a local, or the wind moving through the brush. She spent her first days of retirement walking the old trails, breathing the sharp air, letting the ache of the case unwind from her bones. Strangers sometimes recognized her and pressed her hand, thanked her for answers, for hope, for remembering. She never said much in reply. It was enough to know the silence was lifting. On her last day in town, she drove the empty roads one final time, stopping at every place the search had led her. The marina, the cliffs, the boarded-up shack of the late Everett Murrow, now just a broken pile of timber and memory. She scattered wildflowers at the water's edge, a final gesture for all those still unnamed, all those still lost somewhere between the tides. That evening, as dusk fell and a faint mist curled over the bay, Talbot stood at the top of the cliffs. The marker lights bobbed on the water, steady and harmless now. Behind her, the town glowed warm in the gathering dark. She closed her eyes and let the wind carry Sarah's words to her, words she had found scrawled in the last page of the journal. Even when no one is looking, I am here. Even when I am gone, I am not lost. Talbot smiled, tears hot and clean as sunlight. She turned from the water and walked home. For the first time in decades, she felt the return of quiet, not the silence of mystery, but the peace that comes after a long search ends. The bay, at last, was still. June 2024. Location: Miller's Point, Puget Sound. The days grew long as summer claimed Miller's Point. The town, once infamous for its shadows, softened under the golden haze of June. Tourists returned for the first time in years, drawn by the view, the history, and the new memorial on the cliffs. A place for names, for photographs, for whispered prayers. Sometimes at sunset, children played tag along the path above the water, their voices bright. No one feared the marker lights anymore. The old myths had faded, replaced by stories of survival and rescue. But when the fog rolled in thick off the bay, locals still watched the horizon, remembering all that had been lost and found beneath these tides. On a warm evening, Alex Kim came back alone. He parked by the playground, carrying flowers and Sarah's faded journal, and made his way to the stone memorial. He knelt in the wild grass, tracing his sister's name with careful fingers. He spoke softly. "You came home, Sarah. You brought us all back." A hush settled, broken only by gulls and the distant rattle of crab pots. Alex opened the journal and read a line aloud, one that Sarah had scribbled in the darkness, meant for whoever would listen. "Don't wait for the light. If you have hope, you can always find your way." He smiled, tears shining, and set the flowers at the stone. As dusk settled, the marker buoys blinked alive across the bay. Farther out, Bay 7's light glimmered, no longer a warning, just a steady pulse on the water. Families strolled along the pier, their voices calm. Alex lingered a moment longer, then turned for home, feeling the weight of grief lightened by the years, and by the courage that endures, even when the world tries to forget. Detective Nia Talbot, now retired, watched the news from her small kitchen in Silverdale. She saw photos of the memorial, recognized faces of families she'd come to know. Sometimes she dreamed of the bay, the fog, the tide, the glint of a red coat in the trees. She woke with her heart pounding, but the fear was gone. The ghosts, she felt, had finally settled. She kept a Polaroid on her refrigerator, Sarah and Marco, laughing on the sand, arms thrown wide to the wind. On the back, Sarah's handwriting, "For whoever is looking, don't give up. I am not lost." Talbot made tea, stepped outside, and let the early summer air wash over her. In the quiet, she thought of all the voices that had called out from the darkness, and all those, at last, who had been heard. At Miller's Point, Another generation of children chased kites along the cliffs. Parents called them home for supper as the sky burned pink and gold. The light at Bay 7 shone steady, a beacon not of warning, but of memory, a promise that the lost would never again go unnamed. And somewhere, carried on the wind, a child's voice echoed from long ago, "I am here. Even in the dark, I am here." The bay, once haunted by silence, now whispered only peace,